Health Law Project, we are a free legal aid program. We provide free legal services to people across Pennsylvania. Jake and I are both in the Pittsburgh office on the south side, although I don't think either of us have worked from there since the pandemic started. So what we focus on is helping people with Medicaid issues primarily. So people who are having trouble accessing public health care coverage or services. So a lot of the people we work with are on Medicaid only, or they may have both Medicare and Medicaid. The way we serve people, we have a statewide helpline number. People can call our office. Our helpline is open on Mondays and Wednesdays, and people can call and be connected with a case handler about their issue. They can email our office. We have a lot of consumer education materials on our website. Our website is a really good resource. And then we also publish a monthly-ish email newsletter. If you're interested in it, you can email staff@phlp.org to join our newsletter. We put in just information about updates to Medicaid issues and other kind of public health issues that are going on. And then we also do systemic advocacy, primarily with Pennsylvania Department of Human Services officials about Medicaid programs and how they're working for Pennsylvania consumers.
Katie, before we get too far into it, Jan, I was thinking it might be best if you mute, because I can hear Katie's echo through Jan, and then just unmute, I guess, if there's a question.
Thanks, Jake.
You're welcome.
Okay. But yeah, hopefully that'll work a little better. All right, so a little bit about the way we help people. So often people call us because they have questions about whether they're eligible for Medicaid or other programs, so we can screen people for benefits. If people are having Medicaid eligibility problems, they've been denied Medicaid or they've had Medicaid, they've gotten a notice that they're being terminated. Sometimes we represent people at appeals when they're losing their Medicaid. A lot of what we do is interact with the county assistance offices and try to fix and just kind of troubleshoot problems people are having. We also help people when they're having trouble accessing the care they need. So if they are having trouble accessing medications, for example, at the pharmacy for, something's going wrong and they should be able to get their medications and they aren't. If they've been denied services by their Medicaid managed care health plan, we can advise and sometimes represent people in their appeals. And then we're a resource for folks like you. So we get a lot of calls from hospital social workers, providers, other advocates who are working with Medicaid consumers and have questions about how to best help them. So feel free, after this training, Jake and I both have our contact information included. If you need to reach out to us, feel free. We're always happy to talk through a situation. And there's no income limit to qualify for our services. Our services are free and anyone can contact us regardless of their income. All right. So here is what we're going to talk through today. You can see we have sort of a packed agenda. We're going to talk through various immigration statuses and the immigration status standards for qualifying for Medicaid. There's the qualified status and the lawfully present status. These are in quotes because they're legal terms of art that have specific meanings in the Medicaid context. And then we're going to go through various ways that people can qualify for Medicaid, how to help immigrants applying for Medicaid, and then a little bit about penny and public charge before we finish up. So just a reminder that Jake and I are Medicaid lawyers. We are not immigration lawyers. So we will do our best, but immigration law is not our area of expertise. And like I said, we do have a lot of content to cover, but please feel free to, raise your hand if you want to interrupt and ask a question. And I'll take breaks after going through some sections to ask for questions. Okay, so just to make sure we're all at the same baseline, I wanted to start with the basics of Medicaid eligibility. So Medicaid, which is called medical assistance in Pennsylvania, is health insurance for low-income people who fit into certain groups. So it's a federal health program that's run in Pennsylvania by the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. And Medicaid programs generally involve a mix of federal and state dollars, with a few exceptions, one of which Jake is going to talk about. Medicaid can be someone's only insurance, or it can be secondary coverage for someone with Medicare or other private insurance. And Medicaid is always going to be the payer of last resort. So if other insurance is available, that will always be billed first, and then Medicaid would be billed second. In order to qualify for Medicaid, you have to meet all 4 of these criteria. You have to be residency, the category of Medicaid, income limits, and then immigration status. And in terms of the residency, that one is generally pretty easy. You just have to be living in Pennsylvania. There's no length of time requirement. You just need to be here in Pennsylvania with a current intent to stay. So just so I have a sense, are you folks familiar with Medicaid? Are you screening folks for Medicaid eligibility or helping people apply? Or you're just trying to understand the programs that are available?
I think everybody's just like getting started, so they're just trying to get a understanding of the programs.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. All right. So when you are determining if someone is eligible for Medicaid, you go through this multi-step analysis. Typically, you're looking at what category does this person fit into. I shared as part of the materials our 2021 monthly income limits for Medicaid and other health programs. If you take a look at that, you'll see that there are a whole bunch of different categories of Medicaid. So there's lots of different ways that people can qualify. There's a category of Medicaid for seniors and people with disabilities. There's one for children, one for pregnant women, one for workers with disabilities or other chronic health conditions, for low-income adults. So there's various ways that people can qualify for Medicaid. So you have to see, is there a category that this person fits into? And then you're going to look at what's their household size. So household size generally impacts what are the income and resource limits that apply. So for all of the Medicaid programs, there are income limits. Not all the Medicaid programs have resource limits, but the majority of them do. And so then you'll be looking at what is the income and resource limit for this category of Medicaid, and do they qualify? Are they under that limit? And then for immigrants, there is a 4th step, which is really done first for immigrants. What is the person's immigration status, and does it meet the relevant Medicaid standard? So like I said, for an immigrant, we're going to look at that 4th step first. So these are the 2 key immigration standards that you need to understand for Medicaid purposes. So first is the lawfully present standard. And this is the broader standard. This is the standard for children, people who are pregnant, and very low income adults who fit into certain categories. They have a disability or need health sustaining meds, something like that. So generally, these are the groups that I think the government has decided we want to make sure we're covering these folks. We want to make sure children, pregnant people, and very low income adults with disabilities or other issues have coverage. So for these folks, the standard is broader. to get just regular Medicaid. Qualified is a narrower standard. This is the standard that most adults have to fall into if they're seeking to qualify for Medicaid. So adults who fall under the qualified standard are generally subject to a 5-year waiting period to qualify for Medicaid, with exceptions for certain humanitarian immigrants like refugees or asylees, and we're going to go over that. Jake's also going to talk about emergency medical assistance. There's no immigration status requirement for that category, but we'll get to that. So unfortunately, because this is often confusing and people often don't know the answer to this, figuring out someone's status is really important to be able to figure out whether they qualify for Medicaid or what kind of Medicaid they might qualify for. So you need to know a potential client status in order to go through the analysis and determine whether someone's eligible for Medicaid. So as I'm sure all of you know, this is a very touchy subject and people get anxious when you start to ask them questions about their immigration status. So you want to assure the person you're working with that all of their information will be kept confidential, and just ask questions carefully with awareness that people are often anxious about this topic. So, just delving into what is someone's immigration status? Do they have any paperwork they could show you? Finding out when someone arrived in the United States, how they came to be here. Was it through a family member's petition, through an employer's petition? Do they have an immigration lawyer? Have they applied for a status change? So getting through that information and kind of using that to figure out someone's status is helpful. So we just wanted to walk through some of the common immigration statuses that you might see or that we sometimes see in our office. Refugees are folks who leave their country because they fear for their own life or safety. Asylum seekers are people who have submitted claims for refugee status after coming to the United States. This often is a point of confusion because people come to the United States as an asylum seeker, they apply for asylum, and then they may have a very long waiting period where they're not asylees, their application hasn't been approved, but they're in sort of this waiting period. Immigrants are considered to be foreign nationals who are seeking permanent residence in the United States, and there's various ways that people can access that. And then people who are temporary visitors, like students or people who have just a visa for a short time, are considered non-immigrants. We talk to a lot of people who are lawful permanent residents, so non-citizens who've been granted authorization to live and work in the United States, otherwise known as green card holders. And then there's a lot of people, like with the asylee category, people who have a pending application for adjustment of status. I think Jake has probably talked to some VAWA self-petitioners, people who are battered spouses, children, parents of U.S. citizens, or legal permanent residents who apply for status through the Violence Against Women Act. There's special immigrant juvenile status for children who've been abused. There's visas for victims of crime and for victims of human trafficking. And then people who don't have a status are considered undocumented. So people who have come into the U.S. without inspection, maybe who have overstayed their visa, or just who don't presently have a lawful status are considered undocumented. And mixed status families are very common. So that's also depending on who is seeking Medicaid, whether someone might be seeking Medicaid just for their child, for their whole family. So you have to suss out everyone's immigration status. And also, I think part of the challenge is that immigration status is often fluid. So people are applying for a change in their status. So those are all things to watch out for. So just some of the things that can help if you're working with immigrants and trying to figure out their status. If they have a green card, that's helpful to take a look at. They may have an employment authorization card, an I-94 arrival departure form. If they have a certificate of naturalization or other immigration court order, those things can all be helpful to take a look at. And the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website has a lot of helpful information, especially, you know, if you're trying to decipher employment authorization category codes or figure out their green card category. Also, Google is helpful. All right, so now that we have kind of a baseline for what we're talking about, let's get into qualified immigrants and the 5-year bar. Unless people have questions at this point before we get into this. Does anybody have a question? We good? Okay. All right, so qualified non-citizen. Oh, I'm sorry. Jan, did you have a question?
Oh, I accidentally unmuted.
Okay. Got it. All right, so qualified non-citizen is the standard for most adults, except for people who are pregnant or who have very low income and are applying for state-funded Medicaid or emergency medical assistance. So this is the Medicaid standard generally for adults, and for Medicaid purposes, an adult means the person is age 21 plus. Under age 21, you're considered a child for Medicaid purposes. Adults who are subject to the qualified standard may also be subject to a 5-year waiting period depending on their status. And the 5-year bar means that the person must be in a qualified immigration status for 5 years before they're eligible for regular Medicaid. And we have a reference here to the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook in the chapter that talks about citizens and non-citizens and categories and all of that. At the end of our presentation, we have links to resources, and one of those is to the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook, which is basically the rule book for Pennsylvania's Medicaid program. So you can go to the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook if you're trying to figure out what rules apply to this person. Sometimes we have to quote the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook to the county assistance offices when we're reaching out to them about a person's case. So we've included that as it can be a helpful resource. So these are the categories of immigrants that are considered to be qualified, quote unquote, for Medicaid purposes. Essentially, these are all categories of folks who are known to the government and here permanently versus temporarily, like a student or someone with a work or visitor visa. The most common is legal permanent residents or green card holders. There are a variety of ways that people can obtain a green card through, you know, family petition, employment, through refugee or asylee status. And so that's part of what you want to find out if you're working with someone who's a legal permanent resident. So as I've mentioned, the 5-year bar is basically a waiting period from the date that a person obtains qualified status. So once someone is a legal permanent resident, for example, once they have that status, then that 5-year clock starts to tick. So sometimes, I know I was working with a woman a couple years ago whose mother had been in the country for a long time, but had only become a lawful permanent resident within the last 3 years. And she was trying to get her services and just was very confused about, it seemed like she'd been here for a long time, but she hadn't been here long enough in a qualified status in order to now qualify for full Medicaid coverage. So the 5-year waiting period does not apply to certain immigration categories. Essentially, it doesn't apply to most humanitarian immigrants. So people who are refugees or asylees who have been granted withholding of deportation, Cuban or Haitian entrants, Iraqi or Afghan special immigrants, and then U.S. veterans or active duty military spouses or children. None of them would have to deal with this 5-year waiting period. For qualified immigrants to whom the 5-year bar does not apply, once they have that qualified status, they can just apply for Medicaid immediately, essentially as if they were U.S. citizens. So for these humanitarian immigrants who are exempt from the 5-year bar, kids under 21, people who are pregnant, also people who've been continuously present in the United States since 1996, none of them have to deal with this 5-year waiting period. So the folks who are subject to the 5-year bar are, the majority of the ones that I've seen are people who entered on family-based petitions, but also people who are here on employment-based petitions, diversity lottery winners, and unfortunately VAWA petitioners. You would think that they would be thought of as a humanitarian category, but they are subject to this 5-year bar. So we just wanted to show you this. Oh, go ahead.
What's diversity lottery winners?
I think, you know what, honestly, I can't remember. It has to, do you know, Jake, off the top of your head?
Yes, so there's you won't see this very often, but there is a small group of people that can sign up based on certain countries. And if their name is picked, they get a fast track through the diversity lottery system to become a citizen. So they don't have to wait the normal waiting periods. And I don't have the list of countries in front of me, but honestly, I've been here for about 2 years and I have never seen one. But it's just important to know that if you do, that there are certain rules for Medicaid for them, but there's very rare, and the numbers continually drop each year of the amount of people that are allowed to come into the diversity lottery. So I guess it's just more important to know that if you do see it, don't be surprised, but I wouldn't expect you to see it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so the idea is that for countries where we don't have a lot of people from this country living here, it encourages for the diversity, I guess, for people from this country. And we actually have seen some, especially from Uzbekistan, so you might think that status. But they generally have the same, 5-year. Thank you.
Thanks. See, this is a collaborative process, right?
We work together here.
We appreciate that. All right, so we included this chart from the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook just because it's a helpful resource as a place you can go that indicates what documentation is needed by the County Assistance Office if an immigrant is applying for Medicaid, and whether someone in a particular immigration category is subject to that 5-year bar. Okay, so we wanted to go through a couple examples as we talk through this, just to hopefully make it more real. So Lando, age 23, entered the country with a green card in 2014 based on a family member's petition. Does Lando meet Medicaid's immigration status standard for adults? So first, we need to know the basis of his green card. So here we know that he's here on a family-based petition, and we need to know that because it's relevant to whether the 5-year bar applies. So Lando, as a green card holder, falls into the qualified standard. He's an adult, a green card holder, so he is qualified. He is subject to the 5-year bar since he's a green card holder based on a family member's petition. And he's had his green card since 2014, so he satisfies that 5-year bar. So now that it's clear that he does meet Medicaid's eligibility, or meets the immigration step in Medicaid's eligibility process, you would then move on to the rest of the analysis and look at, is he a resident of Pennsylvania? Is there a category of Medicaid that he'd fit into? And then does he meet the income and resource limits for that category? So does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? All right, so let's go over. Okay, let's go over another example. So Ray has been in the U.S. with a green card as a refugee since 2016. Her husband Kylo joined her in 2017 and has legal permanent resident status based on Ray's petition. They work in the food industry and earn around $1,700 a month, which works out to about 125% of the federal poverty level. So does either Ray or Kylo meet Medicaid's immigration status standard? So again, both of them are legal permanent residents, but you need to ask and know how each of them got their green card. So Ray, as a green card holder, falls into the qualified standard. Because she's a refugee, she's not subject to the 5-year bar, so she is potentially eligible for Medicaid, and you can move on to the analysis of her income and resources and what categories she might fit into. For Kylo, who is also a green card holder, and so is also a qualified immigrant, because his green card is based on a family member's petition, he is subject to the 5-year bar. And since he's only been in the United States with his green card since 2017, he has not yet satisfied the 5-year bar. So he would not be eligible for regular Medicaid. If he has an urgent situation, he could look to emergency medical assistance, which Jake's going to talk about in a little bit. So does that make sense? Any questions about these two examples? All right, so next let's review the lawfully present standard. So lawfully present is the standard for people who are pregnant, children under age 21, and very low income adults who fall into certain categories that allow them to qualify for state-funded Medicaid. People who fall into this lawfully present standard are not subject to the 5-year bar. There's no waiting period for these folks to apply for Medicaid. The lawfully present standard includes a broad range of statuses that basically includes almost anyone who's in the U.S. with permission, even if they're just here for a short or a limited period of time. So this includes non-immigrants. We talked about that earlier. People who are just here with tourist visas or student visas. It also includes people with temporary protected status from countries U.S. Homeland Security has designated as too dangerous to return to. We just wanted to note that these countries do change, so it's worth checking the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website for the most current list. I checked yesterday, I think this was the most current list, but it does change, and a couple countries had been added since the last time I checked it. So these are just a few examples of lawfully present statuses that would qualify. Unfortunately, it does not include people who are DACA recipients or dreamers. They are not considered lawfully present. And Jake's going to talk about this, but lawfully present is also the standard for marketplace or penny insurance. So just as a way to look at this in a or think about it visually, lawfully present is the larger group with a smaller category within that of statuses that are considered qualified. And then undocumented folks are a separate group. And then in the background are DACA recipients or people maybe who have orders of supervision without employment authorization, people who have applied for asylum but don't yet have an employment authorization. They're kind of in the background but don't fall into lawfully present or qualified or really undocumented. So think of lawfully present kind of as a Venn diagram. It includes qualified immigrants and a lot more. So we just wanted to include, these are a whole lot of statuses that do fall into the lawfully present immigration categories. So there's all the qualified immigrants plus all these other lawfully present immigrants. So there's a whole bunch of these people who are asylum applicants, people who have, victims of trafficking. All of these are applicants for any of these statuses are also included. Applicants for qualified statuses are generally considered lawfully present. Asylum applicants are considered lawfully present once they've been granted employment authorization, or if they're under 14, if they've had an asylum application pending for at least 180 days. And that is, I think, confusing. So sometimes clients think if they've been granted employment authorization, they have that status they've applied for, or that that application for a particular status has been granted, but that often is not true. So that's unfortunately why we have to dig into the details of someone's immigration status when doing this analysis. All right, so another example. Jen, age 20, is uninsured and pregnant. She has a valid student visa and earns $500 a month working part-time. She's been in the United States for 2 years. Does she qualify for Medicaid? So because she's a pregnant person and actually would also be considered a child for Medicaid purposes, the standard that applies to her is whether she's lawfully present. Does she fit into one of those lawfully present categories? And the answer is yes. She has a valid student visa, so she fits into the lawfully present standard. So because of that, she doesn't need to be in one of the qualified categories or deal with the 5-year bar. She meets the immigration step in the eligibility analysis and would also qualify for Medicaid based on her income. Here's another example. I love all of Jake's Star Wars examples. They're great. Anakin and Padme have applied for asylum status for themselves and their son Luke, age 6. Their daughter Leia, age 3, is a U.S. citizen. So the parents and Luke have been granted Social Security numbers, and the parents have work authorization while their petition is pending. Who meets Medicaid's immigration status? All right, so as adults with pending asylum petitions where they have been granted employment authorization, Anakin and Padme are in a lawfully present immigration category, but that is not going to help them as they are non-pregnant adults. they would need to be in a qualified immigration category in order to be eligible for regular Medicaid. So they're going to need to look to emergency medical assistance or state-funded Medicaid, which Jake's going to go over. And then for Luke, we will assume that his asylum application has been pending for 180 days. He's in a lawfully present status, and as a child, that's all he needs to qualify for Medicaid. He's not subject to any 5-year bar. And then Leia, as a U.S. citizen, doesn't have to deal with this step. She just needs to meet income, resource, and category qualifications. All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing here and see if anybody has any questions before I turn it over to Jake.
Thanks, Katie. Let's see if I don't screw this up.
I have a question. Are migrants or refugees who also meet the age requirements, are they eligible for Medicare?
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Yes, potentially. So if they have enough quarters of coverage, like if they've been working, they can potentially qualify. I know there's a really good resource on that topic that I could share if you're interested. I just have to find it. I can send it to Jan and Kara.
Can we just refer to it and see you guys for Medicare stuff?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Oh, I just had one of the other service coordinators and I think just referred a client, you guys related to Medicare stuff.
Oh, yeah. Katie and another person in our Pittsburgh office, Erin Gay, are our Medicare experts. So I would leave that to her. I hide when we get Medicare stuff.
Yeah, and I talked to Tiffany recently.
Other questions?
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions right now, I'll get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Jake Lee. I am an attorney here in the Pittsburgh office with Katie. As she mentioned before, I normally work with victims of crime, although I will be branching out here a little bit soon. That's why she had mentioned that about the VAWA petitioners. So right now, all my clients have been, or at least have stated that they've been affected or a victim of a crime. So that's kind of my area of expertise right now, but it does kind of overlap a lot with immigration statuses, as we all are aware that especially undocumented persons face a lot more adversity and tend to not report crimes as much, but sometimes they're willing to say that they've been impacted by a crime, and in that case, they get switched to me. So I'm going to get started here with GA-related medical assistance. Now, this is, as Katie had mentioned before, there are very few statuses or very few Medicaid categories that the state pays for and does not receive federal dollars for, and this is one of them. And that also means that they're going to be losing some protections for this type of Medicaid. And I apologize if it's confusing if I use Medicaid and medical assistance interchangeably. They are the same thing. I just wanted to point that out as well. So let's get started here, and then I'll explain some of the protections they're losing as it gets to this. So this is GA-related medical assistance, and it's for very low-income immigrant adults. When you're looking here, you need to be lawfully present, as Katie went through, and that's about it to qualify as regards for an immigration status. However, you will see once we get into it that the income guidelines for this type of medical assistance are extremely low. So there's a very specific type of immigrants that get this type of medical assistance, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides. But so the category here is to get this, you not only have to have the very low income, but you need to have a disability, and that's under number one here, or that you're on a health sustaining medication, which doesn't need to be that you will die without the medication. There's a wide variety of medication that can be considered health sustaining. Insulin is one, which, I guess you would die if you didn't have your insulin, but it doesn't need to be something that is keeping you from your deathbed. It's just a medication. So if you have clients that are taking a medication and you think that they may qualify for that, let us know and we'll be happy to. It would take too long to go through the medications here, but just know that it doesn't need to be like that you miss one pill and that you would die. So another one here is domestic violence or drug and alcohol treatment. These are limited categories for this, so they're not indefinite. It's about 9 months is when you would get health Medicaid for domestic violence or drug and alcohol treatment. What this is for is if, which I see quite often, is somebody who is leaving a domestic violence situation and needs to go into treatment or a shelter and they take Medicaid. That is a way that they can get around the other, if they don't have a disability or health sustaining medications, but they are in a domestic violence situation, you can get them Medicaid under this for a specific amount of time. That is usually the last resort when we look to that because of it is limited. So if they do qualify another way, you would want to do it that way, which wouldn't have an end. And moving forward, also, if you're age 59 and above, we'll get into that here. So here's the monthly income limits. As I said before, it is very low income. It's pretty much for people who are not working at all. So when you have the GA-related medical assistance, and if you have a disability or the need for life-sustaining medication, the income limit is $205 for household of one, resource limit, and et cetera is on there. Now, these can vary slightly by region, like a couple of dollars. It's in the medical assistance eligibility handbook. Well, I have cited a few chapters or screenshots from there here, so you guys don't have to dig into that lovely book, but just know that this is for people that mainly are not working at all. And the GA related medical assistance, if 59 plus. Now this we do see a little bit more often because these can be immigrant parents of perhaps somebody who is already here, and maybe they're a citizen. Maybe they are on some sort of other category, but their parents come over and their parents are normally older and they're not working. So this is a way for those immigrant parents to get medical assistance in Pennsylvania without having to use the 5-year bar. So that's normally where I see GA-related medical assistance come in. I don't believe I've really seen it much elsewhere other than elderly parents, but just know that it is an option if somebody isn't working and they are disabled. So here is from the medical assistance handbook here. I wanted to pull this out. So if you read the note there, that's what I was talking about when it comes to the state-funded medical assistance, and that's the GA-related. So they have to meet all the other categories for the GA-related medical assistance, but it is an option if they're lawfully present. So again, good job to Katy for pronouncing all the Star Wars names correctly. I do keep them going here. Here is Anakin and Padme, and they have applied for an asylum status for themselves and their son Luke. Daughter Leia is a U.S. citizen, and Anakin earns $250 per week as an Uber driver. He and Padme both take medications for hypertension. So that is an allude to the life-sustaining medications that we had talked about before. Hypertension is not something that you would normally see as life-threatening. I mean, it can be, but it's not something that you would normally considering life-threatening. And I wanted to use that as an example because it doesn't need to be life-threatening. That's why it's health-sustaining medication and not, life-sustaining medication. So here we are, just to get into the immigration status here. Anakin and Padme are both lawfully present as they're currently waiting their asylum petition. Luke is also, and Leia obviously is a U.S. citizen. So again, I just like to have the U.S. citizen in there too, because you will see a lot of these mixed status families, and a lot of times, an immigrant parents or something are just unaware that because they may not qualify for medical assistance does not mean that their children do not qualify, and more than likely not, the children will qualify if they have some sort of lawfully present status. So Anakin and Padme, no, they're not Medicaid eligible in this situation because Anakin earns $250 per week, and if you remember, it was much lower than that to qualify. But Luke, on the other hand, is under the federal poverty guidelines and lawfully present. He would be eligible for Medicaid as long as he meets the other categories. So it's important to note that in these mixed status families, you'll see a lot of times where sometimes the parents don't have any status at all, and they are nervous about filling out an application for their children because they're worried it could come back to them. That's not the case. And we can get into that a little bit more later. But if you see that, it's reassuring to let them know that applying for their children will not alert anybody to the parent status. It's irrelevant. So here in example 6, we switched to Game of Thrones, and we're doing a little Sansa seeks insurance for elderly parents. This is going to be kind of the issue I was talking about earlier with elderly parents coming. You have Catelyn and Ned, age 69 and 74, who recently arrived from Canada and have green cards based on Sansa's petition. Her mother has Parkinson's, her father has mobility issues, they have no income or savings. Do they qualify for Medicaid? So, as we said before, this is where the GA coverage comes in. Catelyn and Ned are not working, according to the hypothetical here. So they have no income. They have no savings either. So they're going to qualify under GA related, and they're not subject to the they are subject to the 5-year bar, but they don't need to satisfy it. So they still will qualify right away because of their low income and because of their disability. Does anybody have any questions about that? I'll move on, but don't feel free to interrupt me. I also get tired of hearing my own voice, so I'm here to answer questions as well. So we're going to talk about emergency medical assistance now. Now, Katie had mentioned this earlier. This is the only option available for people who are currently subject through Medicaid. This is the only Medicaid option available for undocumented persons and people who are subject to the 5-year bar who have not yet satisfied it. So let's get into what emergency medical assistance is and what it can cover, because sometimes people are surprised by what you can actually get coverage for under emergency medical assistance. So as I stated before, this is the category for people who are restricted from getting actual medical assistance because of their immigration status. So this is, you still have to meet the normal requirements for Medicaid, except the immigration status. So you still need to be low income, or you still need to be underneath the resource ones for certain categories, but you don't need to worry about the immigration status when it comes to EM. So when you have a serious medical condition and an urgent need for care, and that's when this comes in. This isn't a coverage for routine medical care, checkups, those kind of things. It's for a serious medical condition, and we're going to dig into how they define these and how you prove these. But it's important to know that like this isn't going to be like your normal screens or your normal tests. There needs to be something that happens for this to kick in. So what is an emergency medical condition? This is the definition from the Medical Assistance Handbook. And it's important to note that while this definition is a little unwieldy, a little hard to understand, it's important to use this definition when trying to prove an emergency medical condition. So note the 3 prongs at the bottom, that this condition either places the patient's health in serious jeopardy, it can cause serious impairment to bodily functions, or serious dysfunction to bodily organ or part. Now, you'll note that as we were talking about the life-sustaining medication, this does not need to be something that death is imminent or that they're in an emergency room for. However, it does need to have some sort of emergency factor to it. And let's get into kind of what that would be here. So here are the things you don't need to show. Like, you don't need to show that you went to the emergency room. I know that it says emergency medical condition, and people automatically think, well, this is covered for if somebody, is hit while walking, like a hit and run accident, they're rushed to the emergency room. That would be an emergency medical condition, but it doesn't need to be that urgent or sudden for it to come. You don't need to be in an emergency room. And I know that is confusing because it says emergency in the title, but that's why I have this whole slide saying that this doesn't need to be an emergency room thing. And you don't need to be treated in the hospital setting. It can be treatment in a PCP's office or an urgent care or something like that. It doesn't need to be that their life hangs in the balance for this to click in. So we're going to go into some things that I have seen EMA covered for. So it's covered for things like cancer. And so when you have cancer, depending on what type of cancer, there are multiple different treatments you're going all the time. Those things like that, those are often covered through emergency medical assistance. Surgical procedures is a big one. Dialysis has been covered as well. Repair of broken bones. High risk pregnancy is one that's considered EMA. So if you have an undocumented person who is pregnant and they are at a free clinic or something, and they tell them that there's something wrong with the pregnancy and you have to do certain things, that high risk pregnancy will be covered by emergency medical assistance. But just because they are being pregnant does not mean that they get medical assistance, as Katie was saying. If they are lawfully present and pregnant, it does. But if they're not lawfully present, you're going to have to get coverage through EMA. And if it's a high risk pregnancy, they will also cover the labor and delivery. In Pittsburgh, UPMC, McKee, they do these applications with them before they let them leave the hospital. They know this is how they get coverage for it. Now, other than if it's just a normal pregnancy and it's not high risk, the prenatal care, that stuff is not covered under EMA. But like I said, if it is high risk, that stuff is covered, prenatal and the recovery stuff as well. So when we talk about proving an emergency medical condition, there are ways that you need to do this. And these are ones, and if you have any questions about this or you see this with a client, feel free to reach out to us. Sometimes this can get a little in the weeds, a little legalese. So we want to make sure that we give them the best possible chance to get the EMA approved. So here's what you need to do. You need to have the EMC form, which I have included in this next slide, as well as medical records showing the issue, just showing why they're getting the care and what's going to be performed. And then a letter from a doctor, a strongly worded letter from the doctor. Now, I'm going to harp on that a couple of times in the next slides, because that's the most important part, is that the doctor has to say certain things in this letter for it to be approved from what we've seen when we've seen these being approved. So here's the EMC form. As you'll notice that it has just lists of what you're supposed to do, the emergency medical treatment. Now, the important part here that I want to draw your attention to is the treatment dates. So a lot of times, like, as you remember, I had dialysis on the last couple of slides. There's no end date for dialysis usually, unless you're going to give them a new kidney. So you do have to put an expected end date though for coverage. So, and it can be renewed, and it can be renewed usually every 6 months, although it has been there's been a little leeway with it during the pandemic. However, there needs to be an expected end date, and you'll have to apply again to get it covered again. Now, it's easier to get something like dialysis approved again once it was approved the first time, as you show the need is ongoing, but it's going to need to be renewed every 6 months. You're never going to get EMA granted indefinitely. So it's important to note that. And a lot of times you do have to explain this to doctors if they're not familiar with it, because they're going to be like, there's no end date. He's going to be doing this until he's not here or something like that. So they're going to be hesitant to put an expected end date, but you just need to explain to them that it's not going to be approved if it says indefinite or unknown. It just won't be. So this is a hoop that undocumented people need to jump through to get health coverage, and it's confusing. A lot of times undocumented persons are not English language first, and these things are confusing, and that's why like a lot of hands-on help with these applications is how we've seen most of them be approved. So when we talk about the doctor's letter, as I said, I'm going to harp on it. I am going to harp on it a little bit here. This is what we like to have in it. And again, if you run into this and you're helping a client, we can send you a form to send the doctor so it hits all these things. But it's really important that you don't overlook this. Like if you have the medical records and you have the EMC form, don't overlook this as something else, because it really is the most important part. So they have to just identify what it is. And then they have those 3 prongs that we went through on the EMC definition. It's got to hit one of those. And that the need for treatment is immediate. Importantly, on the form, the EMC form that I showed you in the last slide, it does not have a space for the consequences of non-treatment, but the doctor's letter should include that. If they don't get this treatment, this is what can happen, or this is what's going to happen. And that's how we've seen these approved more frequently than not. It's important to note that because that EMC form does not have that, most people wouldn't think to include that, but it's pretty important to include it, as we've seen it approved more often than not once you have a good doctor's letter. Does anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay. So I just wanted to include this slide here just so you can show it's easy. It's kind of like if you were going to take one of these slides and hang it up in your office, as I did when I started here. This is the one I hung up. So what's your diagnosis? What's the emergency medical condition? What kind of treatment are you asking for Medicaid to cover? And what's going to happen if that is not provided? So, and I also included the 3 prongs there, just so it's like all in one slide for you, because it's got to hit one of those prongs. And they're pretty, like you can make a lot of things meet those. You just have to tie it to that definition. So when you're applying for EMA, there's no separate application. You can just use the standard form, the form that we showed you, or by submitting an online application through Compass. If you've helped people apply through, public benefits in Pennsylvania, you're probably familiar with the Compass application. It's the same application. There will be some parts on there that you can leave blank, especially concerning like Social Security number or immigration status. You can just leave those blank. You're not allowed to ask you for any more information with those. And then you can just talk about the EMA. So I just include that last prong. I touched on it before. Because of like the gathering the documents, the doctor's letter, and hitting the prong, it's best that you don't just give somebody instructions on how to do this and then send them on their way. To walk them through this process is the best way to do it. And like I said, you can always reach out to Katy or I or anybody or the helpline here, and we will be able to assist you with that. So again, like I said about the Social Security number and the citizenship stuff on the Compass application, you don't need to provide any of that. You can just write EMA only, non-qualified status. You don't want to lie about the status in the application, but you don't need to put anything down there. They will not ask you for this information, nor do you have to provide it. It's just important to note. And this is more for your knowledge and so that you can reassure people you're helping with this, because of course undocumented persons are very wary about letting anybody know that status. So it's important to know that this is not a gateway for ICE to find them or some sort of other agency to be aware of their status. That's not what this is for. And the county assistance office is not allowed to ask for more information or prod for more information about it. So it's just important to know that you don't want to put down a status if you don't have that status. You don't need to write anything down or just put EMA in. So again, this is just kind of in the weeds here for a little bit, but at the end of this, I like to show that like EMA is fee for service only. So that means that unlike normal or conventional medical assistance, you won't be assigned to like UPMC or AmeriHealth. You won't get a card that says one of those companies. What you will is there will be a card that's from the state, and that's what they'll use to access services. And some EMA cases, like ongoing cases like dialysis and things like that, are placed in case management, and they can be reviewed more often. You may have to submit more documentation, but it's not as difficult to get it as an ongoing thing once you are approved for the first time. So the first application is the most important. So I have included this. All this is still accurate. This was from the beginning. They included the COVID-19 pandemic. That EMA for COVID testing was approved, although most places in Pennsylvania, at least, are not charging for COVID testing. And this is just if you get those questions still. Whether or not it's as relevant as it was before remains to be seen. But I just wanted to include that COVID-19 testing was included in EMA during the pandemic. Okay, so before I move on to tips here, do you guys have any questions? No. Yeah, I mean, this must mean I'm either doing a good job or a bad job. All right. So when it comes to verification, this is, again, kind of, I looped this right along with the EMA, is when you're working with undocumented persons, a lot of times they're going to be wary of inputting their system, especially in any governmental system, about benefits. So Medicaid and CHIP use the Federal Data Hub and the SAVE system. If you guys are familiar with that, that's the Department of Homeland Security's way to verify immigration statuses. Now, this is only used to verify status for benefits eligibility. It's not always verified in real time. I include that because some people have reached out with their newly minted green card, and they have their green card and it's dated like a week ago. They got it a week ago. That SAVE system is not updated that much. It's not going to be in there. So you can add, like, you can take a photocopy of it and send it in. That's fine. If you get it back and it says that we don't have that in our system, well, of course you don't, because it's not updated that often, but it's updated enough that if you send it there, and they'll be like, okay, well, we'll grant pending, and then it will be updated. Now, the Department of Human Services can request documentation of status when you're applying for benefits based on your status. So if you have a client that is, wants to apply for Medicaid, well, they have to show that their immigration status allows them to get Medicaid. And to do that, you can submit, your green card, whatever other documentation that you have, but you don't need a social security number to do this. And sometimes caseworkers do not know this, and that's a point of contention, is that there are some statuses that they don't have a social security number, but they qualify for Medicaid. And I've run into caseworkers saying, no, you need a social security number. You don't always need a social security number. You just need the proper status. So I've included like the medical assistance handbook and the appendixes there that have the statuses that you need. So nowhere does it say you need a social security number. A lot of times they will have a social security number, but you don't always need it. And if there's any questions on whether or not you do, if the county assistance office comes back and says you need a social security number, I would give us a call just to ensure, because sometimes you will have a social security number, but that's not something that you need to get Medicaid. And I wanted to include a slide, as we talked about earlier, and had some examples about this, the mixed households. Individuals can be listed as a non-applicant. So this is a parent say the parent is undocumented or lawfully present but subject to the 5-year bar, they don't need to put any of that information on an application that they're filling out for their children. The application is for their children, it's not for the parent. So if you have a parent who's undocumented, but their children are citizens or have a status that's lawful, then you can apply for those children and they will qualify for Medicaid. There's a lot of misinformation about this out there. That's why I include this, because a lot of times what we will see is that you'll have uninsured children because their parents are afraid. And, with a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of news, it's not unheard of for people to believe these things. So it's important to know, and why I really double down on this, that the parent doesn't need to have a status to apply for their children, and they will not be subject to being investigated based on their status for applying for their children. So it's important to note that, and that you can tell them that, and you can also assist them with the application. So when I have down here that a social security number is generally required for applicants, it's not always, and that's where the caseworkers get confused, but it's especially not when you are applying for EMA. You can apply for EMA without a social security number. Most people that are applying for EMA don't have a social security number. So, and like I had mentioned before, and I have under the first prong there, that unless the immigration status does not make it eligible for an SSN, there are multiple immigration statuses that no matter what you do, you're not going to get a social security number. So they can still apply based on their status, and just let the county assistance office know that they're not going to have a social security number. So when we talk about the privacy concerns, I'm aware of the issues when it comes to dealing with these, as I'm sure as you guys start in this work or have already been into it, that people are very concerned about this, and rightfully so. I believe that there is a lot of issues right now, a lot of misinformation going around about a lot of public benefits. So you'll see at the end of this too that I have a couple slides here on public charge as well. But there's a lot of issues when it comes to privacy. So the county assistance office, with very, very few exceptions, is prohibited from sharing any of the information submitted as part of the benefits applications, other than for processing the application and administering benefits. So if an undocumented person unknowingly applies for public benefits in Pennsylvania, they're not eligible based on their immigration status. But that doesn't mean that the county assistance office now knows that they're an undocumented immigrant and is going to turn that information over to any other agency. They're not allowed to do that. So that is, it's a way to reassure people. They may not always believe you, but the county assistance office is not allowed to use that information for any immigration enforcement officials. So if you look at, and I'm going to show you on the next slide where it says eligible immigration status, there is only a yes box. Yep, right there underneath the circle. So do you have an eligible immigration status? Yes. There is no. So don't put it there if, there is no for a reason. So it's just, helpful to have that information and just to reassure people, because sometimes people are very scared and may not be receiving all the assistance that they can get because of that fear. So I want to have an update here as well when it comes to COVID-19. So right now we're still in the federally declared public health emergency, and most of medical assistance terminations have been halted. There's a couple slides here that I'm going to show you where that protection is ending for certain categories. But for the vast majority of people in Pennsylvania, their terminations have been halted. So right now, if you have medical assistance and during the COVID-19 pandemic, you became ineligible for the medical assistance that you're receiving, you're still receiving that medical assistance until this pandemic ends. So in the future, who knows when, we will see a time where they will try to catch up with all these terminations based on whether or not you're over income or age or something that why, and they will be terminating those people. But right now they're not allowed. And we don't know what that number is. Katie and I could be in for a lot more work. Hopefully not, but it's right now it's halted. So it's important to know that. Right now, they could still lose their medical assistance by ways you could think that you could lose your medical assistance. You move out of state, you ask that you want it removed, or you pass away. So this halt on medical assistance doesn't apply for immigrants when they turn over 21 or turn 21 and pregnant women at the end of the postpartum. They're still allowed to end those medical assistance categories unless they qualify for another category. So as I said that I was going to talk about the one that is ending, we recently received this week, actually, a notification that the pandemic protection for GA-related medical assistance, if I can bring you back to that, which is the very low income disability or over 59, very low income people. So the reason why this is ending is our state legislature has decided to end certain pandemic protections. And doing that, one of the things that our state legislature controls is our state-funded Medicaid. And that's very few people. Katie, I think I remember it being something around 5,000 out of 3 million people in Pennsylvania who have Medicaid. So it's not very often, but what you will see is actually this impacting immigrants more than anybody else because of that category where I showed you about elderly parents moving in and they qualifying for GA-related medical assistance. If they are now over income or no longer qualify for another reason for GA medical assistance, their pandemic protection is ending and they will be ineligible starting in October. They will be sending out renewals to all of these individuals. And so they have a chance to show that they are still eligible before they're cut off. But, you know, a lot of people aren't checking the mail as much or mail delays. So it's important to know. We wanted to include this slide just so you know that a small amount of pandemic protection is ending for these type of people. And it's important to show on this immigration PowerPoint because this will disproportionately affect immigrant families. So I'm going to get into Penny briefly. Penny is the Pennsylvania state-based marketplace for coverage. And this is another option for immigrants who are not eligible for Medicaid based on their immigration status. So if you're a PA resident, and you're a citizen, U.S. national, or have a qualified immigration status, you can enroll through health coverage through Penny, which is similar to the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, but it's through Pennsylvania. So this is important to know that if you have somebody who doesn't qualify because they're waiting for their 5-year bar to end, they can often find coverage through Penny, and they will, it's not going to be normally free, it's income based, but it's a good option for people who would otherwise qualify except for the 5-year bar. So here is the special rule for immigrants who do not qualify for Medicaid based on immigration status. So there's no income floor. It's 0 to 400% of the federal poverty line. To qualify for the premium tax credits, that's there. From the 138 to 400, and I just include the income levels there. Just what is 138% of federal poverty this year, but it's important to know that this is a pretty new system, Penny. Not a whole lot of people know it's available. We don't handle this very much. We would refer it to somebody else, but it's just important to know that it is an option for people who are waiting for maybe that 5-year bar to be done, that there are other health coverage options for them. And I just wanted to include here, who does that help? So we talked about the 5-year bar and lawfully present immigrants. So some very low income people have the option of GA-related medical assistance or the Penny coverage and subsidies, which may also end up being free for them. So sometimes though, to get the penny coverage, you need to show that you don't qualify for Medicaid. And most likely that will be that somebody calls you, they got a denial letter, they don't qualify for Medicaid. They're trying to see how else they can get health coverage. Your next thing should be just to look to Penny, if that's something that you're willing to help, or you can refer to us and we can assist with that as well. So I did want to include some slides here on public charge. Now this was in the news a lot during the Trump administration. It's not, and I'm going to get into it right now, that the Biden administration has reversed the Trump administration's changes. So it's no longer going to be a test that includes Medicaid. But I just wanted to point it out in case you hear about it or in case your clients ask you about it. So in general, public charge is for somebody who wants to apply for a green card or a visa. They have to pass the public charge test. And what the public charge test is whether or not a person is going to use or be dependent on the government for services once they are in the United States. So to do that test, immigration officials review all of their personal circumstances. And I have a list there. And public charge is on that list, but it is weighed just as much as everything else. So it's not an immediate disqualification, which I felt that the news kind of painted it as. It's just one circumstance in the test that they use to determine whether or not to admit somebody. So as I mentioned, the Biden administration abandoned these changes that Trump's administration had recommended or tried to implement, which would have included SNAP, food stamps, or medical assistance. Those no longer qualify. But what does still qualify, in case you get somebody to ask you, is the 1999 public charge test. So this is when somebody gets cash assistance or institutionalized in a long-term care at the U.S. government's expense. Those are the two main issues that come into the public charge test. Now, the Trump administration had wanted to put use of food stamps, use of medical assistance on there, but that is no longer the case. These two, the cash assistance and the institutionalization in long-term care, are included, and they have been included for a very long time. But in the future, there is nothing else like somebody getting Medicaid or food stamps. It is not important. So, and this does not apply to anybody who's pretty much already in the United States. That's another thing that should be pointed out. So the Department of Human Services does not consider the person's receipt of Medicaid or other non-cash benefits or SNAP as part of the public charge. So it's just important to note. And why I wanted to include it was because there's still, I feel, fear-mongering kind of out there about this. So I just wanted to be clear that this has been reverted back to what it was. It rarely affects people. And the Biden administration has withdrawn all the changes. So before we get into these resources here available, I just want to see if there's any questions about public charge. No? Okay. So we just want to include these resources here so that you have them. Now, the Medical Assistance Eligibility Handbook, it's a great read. It's kind of overwhelming at first, so if you can't find what you're looking for in there, let us know. We can assist. We have our manual on healthcare for immigrants, the National Immigration Law Center, which know way more about actual immigration law than Katie and I do. And then we also have the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities beyond the basics of immigrant eligibility. And then I have our contact information here. I, am happy to assist in any way when it comes to these. I know Katie is too. And then sometimes if you have a question and you would like us to maybe take a more hands-on approach with the case, we may refer you to our helpline so that we can actually open up a case through our proper channels for the client, and that we can report to our funders so that we can keep doing what we're doing. And I think that is it. Katie, do you have anything else?
I do not. Thanks.
All right.
Oh, actually, I did. I was going to say that if you are interested in helping someone with a marketplace issue, often we refer people to the Pennsylvania Health Access Network. That's generally who I refer to if somebody has a marketplace or penny issue. And the penny website also has really good FAQs and other good information.
Any final questions or anything?
I have a question. So I know you said that you don't practice immigration law, but we got an email, my group got an email this week about vaccinations and immigration status, and it said that like people have to be vaccinated to apply for a green card or immigration or to be a citizen. So I didn't know if that's anything you've heard or if, I don't know. I was very confused by it, so.
I have not heard that. I would defer to Katie, but I would be interested to see that email if you could forward it to me.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. They had like a reference to the policy that was passed or something, but it was very interesting. So I'll put it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is brand new because I just Googled that out of curiosity, and apparently this is something that's brand new, effective October 1st.
Yeah, I just got the email yesterday, so.
Yeah, that they're going to require COVID-19 vaccination for the immigration medical examination. You have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's the first I'd heard about that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
I also really appreciate the Beyonce quote on your wall.
You noticed that too.
Yeah. Well, guys, if something pops up, like I said, like, you know, I would be looking for that email, but yeah, if you guys think of something later after you review the docs again, or if somebody calls you, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us directly. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day, weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Just look at yourselves for a while. All right, well, that about wraps it up for today. Sorry, our other speaker didn't.
She finally emailed back.
Oh.
She said she